Welcome to the BriteVibe podcast. At BriteVibe, we believe everyone deserves to be happy. But in today's world, everywhere you turn, there is division and negativity. At BriteVibe, we have created a global movement to bring 8 million people together who are inspired to live bright, live bold, and share bright vibes. Alone, it can be hard to change, but together we can change the world. Welcome to the BriteVibe podcast. Hamza Khan, welcome to the BriteVibe podcast. Good to see you, sir.
Matt, thank you for having me. It's an absolute honor.
You know, I don't usually do bios, but I love your bio, so I'm going to read some stuff about your bio. It's short and concise.
Let's go.
Hamza Khan is an award-winning marketer, best-selling author of The Burnout Gamble, a global keynote speaker. Your TED Talk, Stop Managing, Start Leading, has been viewed over 1 million times. I like this part. He empowers youth and early talent through his work as a managing director of Student Life Network, Canada's largest and most comprehensive education resource platform. And then your latest book out is Leadership Reinvented: How to Foster Empathy, Servitude, Diversity, and Innovation in the Workplace. And we're going to talk about that today in the workplace, but I would think even just scratching through workplace and putting in the world, right?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Because all those things, it seems like are hot topics right now, obviously. So yes, what's on your mind today? There's a lot of rich content there.
Yeah, there's so many different threads we could pull at. And I love what you said about this is the future of the world. And I've been thinking about that a lot. Mm-hmm. I've been branded as a future of work expert. And truthfully, I don't even know what that means. I'm happy to roll with it as an ex-marketing and communications professional. I get it. It sounds sexy, helps to start conversations. But when I stand up on stage and I speak about the future of work, I'm perplexed. I'm just as perplexed as anybody in the audience. You know, it's an ambiguous and nebulous term. They say that the future of work deals with 3 questions, right? Who does the work? And when I say they, just there's no one really leading the conversation. We're all part of it. Like you and I are now in the process of shaping what the future of work conversation looks like. But typically it concerns 3 questions. Who does the work? So we talk a lot about diversity, intergenerational communication, and understanding. And I suppose in addition to the 4 generations now working in any typical workplace, you're also introducing the conversation of robots existing as a sort of 5th generation, artificial intelligence. And who knows, with the James Webb telescope out there broadcasting some high-res images, we could very well have another species joining the future of work.
A true alien workforce, right? An
true alien workforce.
Not people coming over the border. We're actually talking about
there we go,
from
man.
Other planets.
And then the second, I was just laughing because thinking technically, I suppose, fauna are part of the workforce as well. You made a joke about feeding some cattle in your backyard.
Yeah, right.
We'll save the punchline for the Patreon show.
Yeah, there we go.
And then in terms of when and where the work is done, that's the second question. COVID made it abundantly clear, especially for knowledge workers, that work can be done anywhere in the world or even in space for that matter, and at all times of the day. And then we go into the third question, which is how is the work done? And then this comes full circle with the earlier allusion to AI and robots. We're finding more ways to integrate artificial intelligence, automation, robotics, machine learning, extended reality, all of this conversation about the metaverse changing the future of work. And I suppose there's a fourth question, a tangential question, which is why is the work done? And I know that's a question being asked by a lot of people who are part of the Great Resignation and younger generations as well. Anyways, very technical questions, no easy answers. But I know just as well as you do and the listeners that when we talk about the future of work, we're really talking about the future of life, given how closely related we are with the work that we do and how much time we spend doing work and how that shapes our reality. So that's the headspace that I'm in these days.
And when you say you're in that headspace, I guess typically, what are you thinking about? What are you working on? Because this is your space, right? And for many of us, it is our space, but this is your career. This is your profession. This is what you study. For a lot of us, I think we're trying to navigate, as I have guests on the shows, I talk to friends of mine. It's kind of like, what's important in life? To your point, it's like, what's important in my life? My family, close friends, and then this sense of purpose. And I think, now more than ever, I think part of the Great Resignation is that people don't feel connected to a sense of purpose, and they're like, so I've got to pay my bills until we get the new thing where I get money every month just for being alive and breathing. I have to pay my bills, so therefore I'm going to do this thing, but then I'm going to look for other jobs or think about other things or my hobby or what I'm going to do this. I mean, I'm planning vacation, whatever I'm doing. Right. And so, what are you seeing in conversations with corporations, with people? I guess, what are other people talking about? This is just my own little bubble, my own circle, the podcast and my friends and family.
You got it. And we both arrived at similar conclusions. There was an earlier episode that you recorded, which I really enjoyed, with Halakuri talking about community care. And you shared an anecdote where you were placed on a table at a work conference with somebody on the opposite end of the political spectrum.
Right.
And
yes.
it caused a little bit of anxiety at first, but you quickly centered on some topics that are universal. You talked about family, you talked about community. And I think the conclusion that everybody reaches in their hero's journey, that it has to be less about the me, more about the we. There's an ego death, there's a suspension of maximizing utility for oneself and a focus on creating utility for everyone around you. And I think it starts with family, it starts with your community, then it extends into the workplace. And, if you're lucky, you get to impact the world in the way that you and I are doing right now through this conversation, hopefully, and, the work that we do outside of this. So I consider myself to be very fortunate that I have an opportunity week after week, day after day, to immerse myself into how corporations, government, and nonprofit organizations are thinking about employee well-being, leadership, and the future of work. And it's exciting for me because, I have a graduate advisor who said that research is really me search. And I think about that all the time, because the question that I've been trying to answer for just over a decade is, why did I burn out? Why did all those years ago in 2014, Mr. Productivity, Mr. 4-hour work week, Mr. Getting things done, how did that happen to me? And how did that happen in a work environment that had all of the wellness and health and wellness benefit available to me? And it's interesting because when I went through that experience of burnout, I tried to solve it through optimizing productivity and well-being. And I reached a dead end. No matter how many massages I got, no matter how many times I talked to a counselor, no matter how much I did yoga and journaled, I was still burned out. Like something was broken over here. So that naturally led to the inquiry of, okay, so what are the structures around us? And I talked about this in my first book, The Burnout Gamble, and it was a fairly low resolution description of these factors: global forces of competition, alienation, society, technology, loneliness, and the economy, things mostly outside of our control. But internalized, they become performance pressure. They contribute to performance pressure. Any given day, you and I and our listeners, they don't feel perfect enough, efficient enough, progressive enough, satisfied enough, or innovative enough. And they give into pattern of overwork that inevitably extinguish the fires of productivity. So I became very curious about what are those factors that contribute to people feeling that way in the workplace, in society. Why do people feel like they have to work as hard as they do? And why do some people have to work harder than others? And I kept on coming time and again through this inquiry. An architecture of like leadership, but not the type of leadership that we think. Like, I think it's easy to romanticize or fantasize about who the bad leaders are. You can point to them. It's Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos. It's Adam Newman of WeWork. It's Travis Kalanick of Uber. But truthfully, man, like, I've been a bad boss. I have behaved in ways that are unbecoming of a leader, in my opinion. And it happens in small ways. People give in to the fear-spurned, counterproductive workplace behaviors at the level of leadership that affect the well-being of employees and organizations as a whole.
And so in your case, let's just walk through that for the people that aren't familiar with you and your work. So it's 2014. What are you doing, and what are you noticing or witnessing or becoming aware of in yourself? Because I think that helps other people relate to. Yeah. There's a lot of people. I mean, we call it the great, it's not it's called the Great Resignation, right? So there's a lot of people experiencing what you did in 2014. You were just early, right? You were a first adopter of the Great Resignation. There's a lot of other people now. So let's get into the weeds on that. What was actually going on, and what was obviously you wrote a book about it. So what was going on, and then what was the catalyst, or how did you transform that or transmute that into something else?
I'm really glad that you asked that question, because I realized with my previous answer, I just went off the deep end. I just let you into the edges of my thoughts. And I was just like, all of these unfinished ideas that I'm actively exploring that probably hopefully sounded coherent, but in
Yes.
my mind, they made sense. Okay, so I'm glad you asked that question. And by the way, Matt, I noticed that my microphone changed. Was that
Yep.
something that you forced on your end?
Nope, it wasn't. It just did it, but it actually is better. So let's not, it's
Okay.
actually better. I'm not getting any, we were cutting out just a little bit before, but we're all good now. So
All right.
even though it popped off, it's in a good way. We're all good. I can hear you
Perfect.
crystal clear.
Amazing. Now I can sit back and relax and
There
not
you
lean
go.
forward over here.
There
So
you
what
go.
happened in 2014? I suppose it really didn't start with me, but I don't want to go too far back. Thinking about why I, as Hamza Khan, felt pressure to overwork. And I think a lot of it was because of the way I was brought up by my parents. My parents are immigrants, hardworking, blue collar pair of people who, I suppose I watched the court side from the court side, the very typical immigrant hustle, if you will. They came to the country, the United States of America, with very little money and big dreams and a very rugged work ethic. I'd watch my mom and dad wake up super early, and then they would work 9, 12, 16-hour work days. And then they would come home and they'd be exhausted. They'd take care of myself and my sister, and then they would repeat this. And so the equation that formed for me very early was hard work equals success, because I got to watch them ascend the socioeconomic ladder as a child and teenager and later adult. I got to see this clear exchange where the time that you put in, the sweat equity, the blood, sweat, and tears leads to success. And I applied that same work ethic throughout my career as a student, student leader, young employee, young leader. And it really started to pay off in 2014 when I was working at a large educational institution in Canada. And I was starting to see the fruits of my labor for the first time in a long time. I mean, this 10,000-hour grind was starting to pay off. And I was getting more responsibility. I was winning awards. I was being given accolades. I was, being regarded as somebody notable in my industry, traveling the country, the world, speaking at conferences, a lot of media publicity. So there was like clear market rewards and signals in the work environment that what I was doing was effective. And I didn't realize that at that point, you're supposed to transition from working hard into working smart. And I just kept on working hard. Because that's all I knew. And it reached a point of counterproductivity. And I think this is illustrated by a productivity law. I think it's called Frazie's Law, if I'm not mistaken. Frazie's or Illick's Law. Regardless, it states that after a while, productivity diminishes and even reaches negative values. That's what happened for me. There were physical symptoms, there were emotional symptoms, there were mental symptoms that something was going wrong, that I just couldn't keep up with the expectations. And there's that saying that the hardest worker gets the biggest shovel. So the harder I was working, the more I was applying myself, the more I was getting to do. I think the reward for doing good work is more opportunity to do more work. And I just took it on, man, Matt, and eventually it resulted in me flaming out in December of 2014 on the eve of a huge trip around the world. I talk about this in one of my TEDx talks called The Burnout Gamble. And I wrote about this. And so if people want to get like the abridged story, you can check that out. I burned out, and it was so confusing to me because I thought at that point I was physically healthy. I was doing all the things. I was waking up early. I mean, just I was following the productivity, the toxic hustle playbook to a T. 5 a.m. club, working out, diet was immaculate. And nevertheless, it happened to me. Like I burned out and I suffered a panic attack that took me years to recover from.
Do you think you were having a heart attack or something, or was
it
just...
two of the doctors who I spoke to said that I suffered a silent heart attack based on the symptoms that I described, which was flabbergasting because I thought, again, up until that point, I was physically healthy, but that couldn't have been further from the truth. They all the specialists that I talked to in the aftermath of this said that I'm lucky to have escaped with no major illness or injury. Some even were flat out saying that at the rate that you were working, as much caffeine as I was consuming, as little sleep as I was getting, I'm lucky that I walked away with my life intact. And that to me was hard to hear. And they all said that regardless, I can no longer work at the levels of intensity that I did, or else next time I would have to pay the price. And so that was very disorienting for me because, Matt, like yourself and all the listeners, so much of my identity is tied up in the work that I do, in the projects that I'm a part of. And so here I was listening to doctors telling me that that was no longer true for me. So I had to rediscover what my identity was, divorced from the level of intensity that I was being rewarded for in the marketplace.
Interesting. And so what was that transition like? So here you are, high firing, high functioning, I'm assuming go,
all set.
It sounds like you had a pretty good caffeine intake.
Yeah, man.
For a drug, so you were
Human
like
caffeine filter, man.
right. So you were pumping it out, and the docs say, okay, no more, or this is going to kill you. So at that point, what did you actually do then? Because this is, I'm assuming, most of your income's coming from speaking, the book, publicity around
business,
the book, right?
teams. I mean, there's
right.
and the book actually happened like after the recovery.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And that's interesting. So the book was very much informed by the recovery. So
right.
I'm stewing in this negative cocktail of emotions. It's resentment, it's self-loathing, it's disappointment, it's anger, it's vindictiveness. It's me unable to come to terms with this break in my life. I felt cheated. I felt like, frankly, I love capitalism, but capitalism didn't love me back. And it was interesting to see sort of my professional circles start to change in the aftermath of this. When I could no longer be valuable in the workplace, people who I thought were friends, you know, that those relationships started to sever.
Right.
People started going bad on me. I started to go bad on people. I mean, it was a lot for me to take. And it sent me into a spiral of depression. And I didn't realize how depressed I was until I actually emerged from that cloud. And I was like, whoa, I was underwater for so long, man. What the hell? You know, put on weight. It was just bad. It was bad. So I lost my train of thought there, Matt. I'm so sorry.
So that's
it's really
that's
difficult
fine
for me to talk about this.
Yeah, well,
but I every time I talk about it.
Well, and I appreciate that, because I appreciate that you are talking about it, because, I think a lot of people are experiencing this right now. A lot of people are having, that's, the work burnout without the quitting, right? So they've done the grind. They've lived through this weird thing, in the world. Now there's all these not messed up. It's just, for me, it was like all my, true north was no longer north, and all my bearings got blown out. And all of a sudden, everything that I'd done to make me successful was no longer making me successful. In fact, it was actually digging a hole deeper financially for me. If I kept kept doing the same thing, and it was like getting worse and worse and worse. And so, there's this certain amount of, what the hell do I do now? So in your case, you went in, I have also gone into, and still am slightly in, a depressed state. Working.
I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and working my way, back to, like, when you said that, when you finally brought your head up, and you were able to see how depressed you were, and I'm like, someday that's going to be me. I mean, literally, it fired in my head. And that's split second. It's like, someday that's going to be me. Someday I'm going to be back to feeling good about being Matt again and feel successful again. Right now, I just don't feel very successful. And so I think there's a lot of, I think that I know I'm not the only one feeling this sense of, not bewilderment, but almost like apathy. But it's just kind of this state of, okay, what the hell do I do now? Right. So I know I have gifts. I know I have gifts and talents, but I'm devaluing my gifts and talents because they're not getting me what I want. Maybe I'm still working, I'm still working, but maybe, people are at a workplace. So you went through this depression period, which lasted about
probably 3 years.
Okay, yeah.
4
Oh,
years.
Good. I'm coming up on 3 years. Good. My anniversary. Yeah, this is perfect. This is perfect timing. Thank you for coming on this morning. So what kind of brought you out of that? Say, because again, whether people are experiencing depression or not, they're experiencing some form of, I don't give a shit, right? Whether it's at work, in their personal life. I mean, we know people gain tons of weight during this period of time. People have stopped doing things that are healthy. Self-care, there's a reason self-care is like ringing, right? So what kind of, for you, was not the wake-up call, but kind of the steps out of this space? That way I can write them down and I'll use them myself.
Okay. Wow. Fantastic. Thank you. And first of all, I appreciate you sharing that. That's very brave of you to do so with your listeners. I haven't listened to many episodes, admittedly, as much as I would have liked of the BriteVibe podcast. But if this is one of the first times that you've disclosed this, or this is the first time somebody's hearing this, I can only imagine how impactful that must be for somebody going through what it is that you're going through right now, what it is that I passed through. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for bringing me back, because I did sense myself spiraling. And it's interesting. The reason why I was spiraling back there was because of the cognitive dissonance that I was feeling. So now that I'm out of it, now that I'm out of it, and I'm like, okay, so it's interesting for me. I love doing these podcasts, but I'm also aware that these podcasts are a big part of my career. Like they help me to, I get introduced to new audiences. I get to share my ideas with them. I get to build connections with thought leaders such as yourself. And so there was a part of me that was speaking about my burnout, and I was trying to get deeper and deeper into it. And I was experiencing the pain and all of the negative feelings from it. But then the other part of my brain was like, hey, shut up. Like, this is bad for business.
I think it's great for business. The message today, I believe, that's relevant in the world and in the workplace in the world is, here's what I experienced. Here's what I went through. I know who you are because I've gone through it too. You know, I've had a similar experience, meaning when we're talking to our fellow human beings, and here's how it ended up for me, right? Here's how I was able to get my brain around it or my mind around it, or here's how I navigate it. So then other people can be like, huh, okay. So
absolutely.
It's almost like an instruction manual. I'm sure a lot of it's in your book. I have not read your book, but yeah. So what was kind of the 3 years of depression? Then what?
Absolutely. And I'm going to tell lizard brain ego to shut off. It's like, let me do this. All right. We're going to be okay. We're going to be fine. Okay.
I promise I won't drop you. I'm here with you, brother. No, I'm not going anywhere.
No, I appreciate that, man. And this is part of the book, right? So what I had to do was develop self-awareness, which up until that point was missing in my life. Didn't journal, didn't talk to therapists proactively. You know, when you're going through that stage of burnout, you start to neglect your friends and your family, you become closed off. And there's a great model called the 12 stages of burnout that I would encourage people to research, that shows how you go from the pressure to overwork to working harder, neglecting your needs. And by the end, you're completely isolated, depressed, and you've depleted all of your energy stores.
Right.
So what I had to do was get back to square one because I had nothing but time on my hands now. I was sick. I was at home, bedridden, completely bewildered. And I was talking to specialists, and they were like, just journal, pour your emotions out into this book or onto the page. And I started doing that. And at first I was just, treating it like writing blog posts because I didn't really know how to engage with my own thoughts critically at that point.
Right.
And then, once I broke through that 1 week barrier of just writing every single day, the writing started to become more cathartic. It started to become more about reflecting on my agency or lack thereof in my situation. And that writing process was healing for me, first of all, but then it also started to lead me down the path of asking bigger questions. Like, so why did this happen to me of all people? Why didn't this happen to my colleagues? Why didn't this happen to my boss? Why doesn't this happen to people that are in different industries? And that's when I first learned about the term burnout, because I think up until that point, I was using it very colloquially. It was an Xbox game that I was playing at the time, Burnout Paradise. And, I would say, oh, I'm burning out. I would joke about it, but I didn't actually know what it meant. So going down that path of inquiry was like, whoa, this is different than run of the mill everyday stress. This is when you, when you tip over, when you cross over. And I was shocked by how few resources there were available for the recovery from burnout. And so I started to approach the problem of burnout in a way that made sense to me through optimizing or reconfiguring my relationship with work. It started with rethinking how I use the canvas of 168 hours available to me each week, and ensuring that if there are periods of energy depletion, that there are proportionate periods of energy replenishment. A lot of that self-awareness involved me understanding where it was that I lost energy. And I didn't understand up until that point that, doing a full day worth of meetings as an introvert, somebody so socially awkward and shy, is completely debilitating. And so if you stack a day full of meetings and then the next day you try to do a presentation, you're going to be completely wiped out. And it's not enough to just go to the gym in the morning and meditate at some point and do yoga later in the day. That's just replenishing your physical energy for the most part. But are you giving yourself mental breaks? Right. So again, looking at my time, energy, and attention as three essential ingredients of my productivity stack, if you will, I started to manipulate them and try to create a system that worked for me. So there was that. I also had to start purging things in my life that were non-essential. I had to deload priorities. I had to look at my calendar and understand that there are things that no longer serve my needs, that weren't aligned with my heat map, if you will. Where are the elements of my life that I gain energy from? I gain energy from friends. I gain energy from family, from playing video games. And I had to really just start to think about parts of my life that I had relegated because I didn't think they were part of the narrative or they may be productive necessarily, but I had to start reconnecting with things that were fun in a guilt-free way. So I had to stop making excuses for going for walks. I had to stop making excuses for listening to podcasts. I had to make
Mm-hmm.
stop making excuses for taking naps in the middle of the workday.
Mm-hmm.
So there was that. Then I had to assemble boundaries around myself. I had to essentially train my colleagues and my friends and my family to communicate with me in a way that didn't deplete me of energy.
Mm.
So I had to establish boundaries around when I would respond to text messages, or
Mm-hmm.
if you're calling me, only call me if there's an emergency, if somebody's dying, God forbid. Because when I get that phone call, I feel pressure to pick it up, but I wasn't being honest with myself up until that point, that speaking on the phone in a way that isn't structured actually saps my energy.
Mm.
And then I had to gain mastery over stress. I had to stop giving into patterns of overwork. I had to stop overachieving and instead accept that being a high performer
Mm-hmm.
is actually more productive than being an overachiever. An overachiever behaves intensely. They're effective in small bursts, but you can't sustain
Right.
that over time.
Right.
And then I had to nurture resilience. And this was the hardest thing for me, I would say, because it involved tremendous self-awareness.
Mm.
Something that I had neglected, and I said that at the beginning of this answer, doing a lot of journaling, a lot of meditation in a way that isn't just physical, allowing
Mm-hmm.
my mind to go blank, suppressing my ego, doing personality assessments, speaking with therapists, counselors, coaches,
Mm-hmm.
and really just opening myself up for the discovery and the analysis necessary to not fall into that trap again of overwork, because it's so easy to fall into that trap.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think it's important for, for leaders and anybody, when I say leader, I really look at everyone as a leader. But everybody has to lead their own life. But as especially when you're leading people, or you're in some type of management role or some type of leadership role, whether it's for profit, not for profit, in your family, wherever it is, if you don't have that balance or understand your own energy flows, you're just, to your point, become less and less effective, which is the opposite of what you want, right? You want to be a servant. I mean, most people want to be a servant leader. They want to take care of others. They want to help others. They want to empower others. But if we're not able to do our own resets, if we're not able to do our own, kind of like you've done, it seems like you've been very methodical in this is what literally gives me energy. This is what takes energy. I actually, as part of our community, had done a class I recorded. We haven't released it, and I don't know if we ever will, but that was one of the first things we used, was like this energy tracker. And it was like, here's the things that give me energy, and here's the things that take energy. And throughout my week, just looking at my calendar and saying, okay, what am I doing to give me energy? Especially on days where I know that I'm going to be expending energy, or it's going to be like, I know I have to do this, or I have to do that. That's part of what I do for my job, and so if I'm going to do that, then what's wrapped around it? And a lot of times I think, we miss out on doing the things you tapped into, which is having fun, right? When people
Wow.
are having fun, life is just lighter. And I know I am not good at planning fun, right? I have a couple of friends, and sometimes I'm lucky enough that they ping me or remind me. And it's like, oh shit, I'm not having fun. So we go to lunch, sometimes having fun can just be having lunch with one of, these guys that are kind of my more jovial, guy, we can kind of cut up and give each other crap. And it's, we're like,
Right.
like teenage boys type, and not in a negative way, but just, we can kid and joke, and we can talk about sport.
Sure.
We can talk about whatever. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm still, and thank you for the reminder, I'm still not doing enough of that planning of fun. Not necessarily, it's not an organized, I have to go do this and that's going to be fun. That doesn't sound that much fun, but I'm going to go hang out with people, or I'm going to go do these things that I at least enjoy, even if they're not fun. And I think that's a lot of what I see missing in life from a lot of people, is they do overwork, they get overstressed. They've got the kids and the job, and maybe they're taking care of, elderly parents, or worried about taking care of, the sandwich generation is what I'm starting to hear about, the Generation X anyway, and the millennials. We have kids, we have parents, there's all kinds of stress. And if we don't take care of ourselves, we do get the heart attacks and the strokes and the high blood pressure and the diabetes. I mean, all the weight gain, all that stuff. And then we're no good to anybody. So it's almost, as I'm listening to you, I'm really remembering, and it's bringing back to me that if we don't take care of ourselves, that which we truly want, which is to help support people, goes away, because then we need maybe professional support, because we do have to have medical support. And now we have less time to do the things that we thought were important in the beginning. It's a downward spiral, right?
Totally. And the way it happens for individuals is the way it also happens for organizations, which are just,
interesting.
individuals at scale, right? It's a process of active inertia where you try to repeat established patterns of behavior, even in response to dramatic environmental shifts, but stuck in ways of thinking and acting and working that brought success in the past, it proves counterproductive when you're going through burnout. Now, what's interesting though is I love that exercise that you did with that team over there, that class of energy management, and we don't talk about that enough. And there was a part of me, the lizard brain, was like, everybody knows about energy management.
I don't think anybody's doing it. I don't think anybody's doing it.
This is the thing, and I had to check myself while you were saying that, and I had to just remind myself that somebody might be listening to this for the first time. Like, this might be a novel concept to somebody, or to your point, Matt, somebody's not implementing it. So here's just a simple thing that I do that's been a complete game changer for me. Maybe two things, I can stack them. Think of your energy as divided into 4 distinct layers: your physical energy, which everybody understands, your mental energy, your emotional energy, and then add in your spiritual energy. And I'm not talking about this in sort of some abstract way. Like, just, you can think about it if you identify, if you have a religious context, great, you can think about that. But if you want to think about it in a secular context, what is the transcendent reason why you're doing what you're doing? Are you doing it for your family? Are you doing it for joy, to make the world a better place? Are you philosophically aligned with your organization's end goal? Whatever the case may be. And then make sure that when you start your day, you visualize that you have 4 full energy buckets, and then you pour from those energy buckets as the day's demands require. Make sure that throughout the day, ideally, you're replenishing those buckets as the day goes, or at the very least by the end of the day, replenish all 4 of those buckets, and do so in a very guilt-free way. Do whatever it takes to replenish them. If you have to put something in your calendar, hard code, like go for a walk, walk the dog, every once a week, just get that massage, even though it seems expensive up front, but think of it as an investment. It's not an expenditure, it's an investment over time to replenish those energy buckets. And make those things non-negotiable. So my brain, I need to hard code them in my calendar. If you look at my calendar right now, there's things in there where if you saw them, Matt, if I did a screen share, you'd be like, what? So you put in gym, you put in like nothing time, you put in think time, you put in date night with your wife. Yeah, I have to do all of these things because left to my own devices, I'm a procrastinator. In my heart, I have a self-destructive tendency to just do nothing. I want to actually just curl up on the couch, smoke weed, play video games all day. Like, I swear to God, like that's what I want to do. But I realize that's a version of me that, if I persist in that way for a long time, I just bounce back. And I feel the drive to come back. But to keep that version of me at bay, and to make sure that I'm showing up in the way that I hope to show up for you in this podcast and everything else, I have to not only put those things in my calendar, but I also have to use the color coding. So if there's something that's a red, that's complete energy depletion. And if there's something red in my calendar, I can't have anything else afterwards, because I will just be completely spent. I won't be as effective or present. And I also build in a proportional amount of recovery. So there's something that's a vibrant green right after this, which is like a do nothing, get a haircut, maybe go and finish that workout that I kind of like half-assed this morning. And that's just an opportunity for me to come back to center, essentially. And then if you're using Gmail, and I think they have this in some of the Microsoft apps as well, or now you can get some plugins that can help you with this. You can get your week at a glance, and you can see just how much red there is, how much orange or yellow or green. And it just gives me a sense of calm at the beginning of the week when I can look at my calendar and be like, yeah, there's going to be like some bursts of red over here. But for the most part, I planned this out in such a way where I will replenish my energy, because everybody's good at managing time. Hopefully you use a calendar, you use a stopwatch, you have some relationship with time, and you know where to be, when to be there, and how much time you're going to be spending doing things. But what about our energy? Right? That's harder to visualize. So if you can start building systems around that, it'll be an absolute game changer for you. And when not you necessarily, Matt.
No, I agree. No, I'm listening. Yeah, no, totally. And again, knowing it and doing it are 2 different things. And we hear about self-care, and we hear about taking care of ourselves. But I think when people think self-care, they do think massages or going to the gym or eating right. And those are all important. But to your point, that's one little piece of the overall, you break that down into 4 different quadrants, but that's one little piece. But then are we actively scheduling these the mental energy, right? The spiritual energy. I mean, how am I replenishing those things? And do I have them on the calendar? Because I know that's where I mess up, is when I start not putting things on the calendar, because then I don't get to your point. It becomes, they don't get prioritized. So it's like something will slide in. It's like, oh, I got to return these emails, or I've got to get these phone calls done. Or then you go back into work mode, overachiever mode. And then,
Yep.
and then at the end of the day, you're shot. And then you go home and you wonder why, you're not getting along with your spouse, or you're not getting along with your kids, or you're not getting along, with yourself. You're angry with yourself because you're empty. Right.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that, there's the time, there's energy, and that's where most people are focusing their efforts in terms of managing. And I'm glad that there's an awareness, a growing awareness, that these are some of the reasons why people are experiencing imbalance. And there's a layer on top of that, which is the attention layer that has been very neglected. And to me, we're reaching a crisis if we're not already there in terms of attention deficit, in terms of things competing for our attention. And I especially think about this from the lens of social media, where I've done a lot of my work and research and teaching. These platforms, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, are designed to be as attention depleting as possible. They're designed to be very interrupting. They tap into our limbic system. They tap into our amygdala, the little red notification. It always communicates subconsciously danger, and then you open up Twitter and you're like, oh shit, like Elon Musk is just doing Elon Musk shit again.
Right.
But whenever you get interrupted, on average, Microsoft shows that it takes about a landmark study by Microsoft shows that on average it takes about 25 minutes to get back to whatever it was that you were doing following the interruption.
Wow.
And people are being interrupted minimum in the workday 1 to 2 times every hour.
Right.
So when you do the math, people are only really productive for up to maybe 4 hours a day. And then that creates that cycle of like, what did I get done today? And I have so much more to do tomorrow. And then it just keeps on cascading. So in addition to our time, in addition to our energy, we also have to become very vigilant about how we manage our attention. What are we giving our attention to? And do we have the necessary discipline with our devices? I've started to find myself slipping into a pattern of checking Reddit right before I go to sleep. And it's fun because I need to know what people are saying about Ben Simmons, and I need to make sure that Zion Williamson is doing all right. But then I start on the NBA subreddit, then I go into the movie subreddit, the hip hop subreddit, the mixed martial arts subreddit, and then I'm like, oh shit, like I was in bed an hour and a half ago. What's going on? Oh yeah, because I've tricked my brain into believing that the sun's out over here, and now I can't sleep because my mind is racing. So I'm starting to fall out of habit with attention management. So this conversation with you is actually very therapeutic, because I'm learning again that I have to regulate where I spend my energy, lest it ruptures through my where I spend my attention, lest it rupture through my energy layer, and then eventually my time layer.
Right. Yeah, totally makes sense. And yeah, I mean, for me, yes, I've had to do things like for 2 years, I didn't ever check or reply to an email. I had an assistant that checked and replied to my email and posted stuff. So I was still responsive, but then she retired. And so it was like, okay, I'm going to go back to doing my own email. But then I decided, and this is just one of the little hacks, I said, okay, I'm not going to put it back on my cell phone, because I would read emails at 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 o'clock at night at home. And then I'd be stressed because I'd be worried about whatever the email said and what am I going to do about that? Or, or even if it was a positive email, it's still, hey, so I was constantly working. And so now it's like, okay, no more email on my phone. So I have to for me, I have to physically come to the office, or if I'm at home, I have to open up my laptop and say, okay. And then it's more of it takes time to open, to open it up. So there's a little bit of time. And then when I'm done, I close it. And I find that that does help me at home with being less stressed, because I'm not constantly getting interrupted. Right. I still play games on my phone, stuff like that. Yes, I do. Do I check social media? Yes, I do. So it's not that, but for me, that was a big stressor, was this whole email thing, because it's a constant flow of information all the time. And so I thought, I'm still going to do it. I'm still going to be responsible. I'm just going to stop letting it drive my emotions or my reaction. And now it's like, okay. And I'm so happy I did, because there's some day, and for me, if I read email first thing in the morning, I'm more fresh. My mind's a little bit more open. I haven't been, through the day, but my energy levels are higher. So I can deal with, I can deal with some stressors, and then I can take care of the stuff right then. I'm not carrying it necessarily to the next day. So that was just one of the things I've done. But I know people go on social media, things where they get off social media and you always hear them saying, hey, this is the best thing I've ever done. But then over time they slip back. So I think, to your point, it's kind of that conscious awareness of, even though it was fun or engaging for a while, what do I got to do to get back in the best me I can possibly be?
Very, very, very important points there, Matt. And I love that practice of deleting your email client from your phone so that you have to go through the ritual of doing it in the office. And I think and I'm actually keen to replicate that experiment with myself, because I'm starting to develop, I'm starting to develop at least awareness that I have an adversarial relationship with my phone. It's a thing that's always attached to me. It feels like a limb at this point, and it just feels like an appendage that's not really doing much other than causing me distress.
Right.
I get anxious whenever I see a notification. I have notifications off on everything except for when I get phone calls. So whenever I get phone calls, whenever I open up my phone, I've been conditioned to see that notification bar of a phone call and be like, oh shit, like I missed something over here. And it's usually like a spam telemarketer, or like,
right, of course.
My accountant being like, hey, like send me this thing. And I'm like, Brian, man, let's use email like normal people here. You don't have to call me. You don't have to call me every time.
For that.
You need something from me, right? Shout out to Brian though. No, but that's really cool. And I like that. And I think that people need to find what works for them. And again, come back to that stacking of time. Everybody has the same, more or less the same 160 hours available to them. How you use that time to then generate the next layer of productivity, which is energy or capacity, I should say. And then on top of that, think of it as a pyramid. At the top of the pyramid, you have attention. And once you have time, energy, and attention stacked, that fine point at the top, that's focus. That's your ability to get things done. But when your attention is ruptured, it affects everything. It disrupts the entire pyramid. So that's a really cool way to think about that, because I think my current productivity struggles have a lot to do with an overflow in my inboxes. And I don't, it's interesting now that I'm saying this out loud, I don't necessarily think of my inbox as just my email inbox. I'm starting to think about my LinkedIn inbox and my Instagram inbox at the same level as my email inbox, because a lot of the work opportunities I get come through social media, except you can't just go check your Instagram inbox. You also have to see the timeline and the reels, and
Is that right?
they get you, right? So cool, man. I'm gonna think about imposing some hard disciplinary measures with the apps on my phone. There's no reason why I need to have an email client on my phone. There's no rules for this. I mean,
exactly. And I found, so I do leave on the calendar invite request still comes through, because then my calendar's live. So literally I was able to delete my email without messing with my calendar, so I can still see, so I can be responsive if somebody's like, they want to meet, or, we do a podcast or whatever, still pings up, I can accept it and go on, but I'm just not engaging in the rest of that process. So I think this is the basis for your next book. That's what I'm thinking. I think I should get some type of royalties. I think I'm inspiring your next book.
Let's collaborate on it, Matt. I think it's cool, right? It's a rock, paper, scissors. And I've seen this now over like the span of a decade. Like I started this inquiry with leadership, with burnout. And then burnout naturally led to the question of leadership. And now the kick that I'm on right now is more empathetic, human-centered leadership. And some listeners might think, okay, if you take this sort of quote unquote soft approach to leadership, it might eventually result in a workforce that isn't as productive. So I think it's like a rock, paper, scissors. Eventually, if every leader becomes a more human-centric leader, you'll have a very self-actualized, happy workforce, but they might not necessarily have the competitive fire that would lead to burnout in the first place. So I think you're right, man. Maybe the next book, maybe the next project is coming back to a post-digital disruption, a post-COVID style of productivity.
Yeah, I love it. And I do want to touch on, this is a great segue into your newest book, Leadership Reinvented: How to Foster Empathy, Servitude, Diversity, and Innovation in the Workplace. And so can you give us some nuggets, or kind of what you're really referring to on how to and why it's important? Empathy, servitude, diversity, and innovation. Why are those things important in the workplace?
Wow. Yeah. Okay. I'll give you the anecdote that inspired the book.
Yes, please.
And then I'll go into the impact of the book, not just on the work that I'm doing, but on me personally as well. So like you and like the listeners, the first 3 months, the fear months of the pandemic were rough. March, April, May, 2020. I was in a state of disbelief. I was like, whoa, like this is really happening. A paradigm shifting event that's changing everything. I mean, it's changing our relationship with each other, with the world of work, with ourselves. And it was fascinating to me because at the time I was approaching the edges of my research on burnout. I was like, okay, so self-care is futile in the face of some factor over here, like that. No matter how much you practice self-care. And I was looking specifically at the growth in markets related to self-care. I was looking at the growth in the pharmaceutical market, the wellness market, the self-help market. And I'm like, okay, over the last 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, there's been meteoric growth in all of these markets. Like there's you can look at the market, and you can markets in aggregate, and you can see exponential growth. So you can deduce from that we're in a golden age of awareness of wellness, well-being, burnout solutions, and that the market has responded in some pretty substantial ways. There's an app for everything. There's a book, there's a podcast to address every facet of the self-care prescription, if you will. But in the face of that, the next logical conclusion is, has the golden age produced the intended results? Are levels of burnout declining? And the answer is a resounding no. It's only getting worse.
Right.
So that was where my head was at. And I'm like, okay, so what's going on here? Like, there's interest, there's solutions, but people are still burning out. And then bam, COVID happens. And so my thinking is interrupted, but I'm now clearly seeing how leaders are responding to COVID.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay. The thing that I went through physically, this amygdala hijack, where the primal part of my brain took over and gave me the three options: fight, flight, or freeze. That happened to me very early when my dad suffered a health scare. He suffered a seizure. And luckily I was at home to catch that happening. But man, when I tell you I had an out-of-body experience, I saw my entire relationship, my life with my dad flash before my eyes when I faced the possibility of him dying. Then I realized, oh shit, this is happening to leaders around the world. Like I'm seeing this now in Justin Trudeau, Jacinda Ardern, Donald Trump at the time. It's happening at the level of corporations. So people aren't actually stepping up in these moments of crises. They're actually thinking back to a level of training, preparation, and their values. And any leader who is behaving in a socially aversive way, I'm like, oh, interesting. And during times of stress, you actually become a bad person. Like you become somebody that creates distress, disutility for others. You actively provoke it, you neglect it, or you accept it. And the ones who seemingly stepped up were the ones who had a human-centric base. Like they were always putting the needs of others before themselves. So that gave me the keyhole into a bigger inquiry into sort of, what is this human-centric leadership thing? What does servant leadership actually look like? What does innovation for the sake of promoting life look like? What does diversity for the sake of unlocking the diversity of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives look like? And this thing that we're calling a soft skill, empathy, is it really a soft skill? Because it seems to me that any leader who practices empathy and its related values, vulnerability, openness, honesty, and transparency, at the time it was like, are these good for the bottom line? And sure enough, here we are now a couple of years later, and I'm like, wow, like there's clearly a pattern over here. There's an architecture of good leadership that engages people, that is good for the bottom line because it's good for people. And so I think we've had this equation backwards. We often thought that the needs of the people came at the expense of the needs of the mission, and the needs of the mission came at the expense of the needs of the people. But COVID totally exposed that as you can't get the best from your business, or you can't get the best organizationally unless you prioritize people. So that to me was an opportunity to really just go all in and bridge those two worlds together. So like, can we solve the burnout problem if leaders behave in more human-centric ways? And what I realize is that it seems to be the closest thing to panacea. Like if you behave as a human-centric leader, it's not only good for people, it helps the burnout issue, it helps the retention issue, it helps the productivity issue, it helps the engagement issue. The only thing it doesn't help in the short term, and it seems counterintuitive, is it doesn't help the leader. So the leader giving away power, the leader empowering people around them, it seems counterintuitive in the moment.
Right.
But when you take a wider time scale, this is how great civilizations, great companies were built. And everybody is capable of doing this. So what I hope to do now with this current era that I'm in, Matt, is tell as many leaders as possible that it is okay, not just okay, it is the right thing to do at all levels to create more leaders.
To empower people, right? And I've noticed,
people.
I've noticed that even in some of the organizations I've been involved in, when I'm too driven or too much in the work, it doesn't allow others to step up into their gifts and into their talents. I mean, there are people, there's always people on the team that have more talents than they're using. And the only way for them to use those talents is for there to be a gap or a space for them to exercise those talents in. And if there's no space, then there's no need for them to express that talent. So yeah, I've I resigned from a board of a company I founded probably 6-8 months ago. And the funny thing is, or the chair of the board, I'm still on the board, but I'm no longer the chair of the board. But the thing was, when I stepped down from being the chairman of the board, it empowered everybody else on the board to go, oh, here's this gap. Here's this, because I'd been kind of running things for a long, long time, even from the chair level. And once I said, well, I'll still serve on the board because I want to support this team, but I'm not going to lead this team anymore. All of a sudden people were like, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this. And by the end of the meeting, I felt so empowered because I felt free. I felt less stressed, but all of a sudden I realized, hey, there's these people in the room that actually want to do this stuff, that are better at it than I am because they're in their niches, right? They're better at it. And so it is going to be better for the company, where I had been probably overextending my stay by a couple of years just because I felt so much responsibility. Like, if I don't do it, who will? And, I created this thing, I need to save this thing post-COVID, right? And so I've got to, and then I was creating so much pressure on myself. But once I actually became a leader, instead of thinking of how am I disempowering the team, and actually became a leader and said, how am I going to empower this team? And the best way I can empower is just take a step back. And I've read so many stories. Well, I'm currently reading Benjamin Hardy's book with Dan Sullivan, Who Not How.
Who Not How. Okay.
Who Not How. And it really speaks to this as well, of who in my life can do this better than I can, and then finding a way to engage with them. Right. Because ultimately, if I want to be really productive and really help other people, support other people, then I need to, the best use of my time is finding their talents and then finding a way to engage in those talents and a space for them to engage more and more in that talent. Right. And so they really talk about in that book how, instead of thinking about how do I do this, like if I have a project, I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm always thinking of projects. Instead of me thinking, how do I do this? It's like, who can do this, right? Who can do this instead of me doing it? Because I still have to hold my space, which is visionary, or the imagination space, or the collaborative space, whatever space I'm holding. And they were giving example even in the book, right? So Dr. Benjamin Hardy, psychologist, goes to, Dan Sullivan, says, I love what you're talking about. And Dan's like, great, you can write the book. Right. And so Benjamin Hardy's writing about Dan Sullivan's work. Right. Right. Even in that, there was collaboration. And it's like, so Dan was like, well, why am I going to take time out of my day? I'm not an author. This isn't what I do. Right. And so, he's the founder of Strategic Coach. And so anyway, that was just, as I was listening to you talk, I was like, yeah, that's right. It's as leaders, we have to create space for others to be empowered and let them make those, obviously let them, when they make mistakes, and be accepting of that, and not just if you continue to micromanage, you're just diluting yourself and diluting others, that you're trying to dilute others, that you're actually empowering them, right? There's a difference between empowering and then delegating. So anyway, sorry. I'm up on my soapbox.
This is so good. And you, Matt, you truly, this is such a serendipitous conversation in ways that I could easily fill another full hour with us, just telling you like how much I needed this conversation with you, man. So thank you. But I was just having a conversation with a couple of buddies last weekend, and I was like, I think I have one more company in me as an entrepreneur. I need to start another organization, and I need to lead people again, because the work that I do now is very much, I think of it as like a special ops. I drop into a company for a short little while, I do what I got to do, and then I pull out. And it's just me. It's just me and a couple of contractors that I bring on from time to time, but I don't really get to flex the learning of the ideas that I share. So I have a little bit of a cognitive dissonance, like, hey, you're prescribing all of these solutions to clients and it's working for them, but can you replicate it within your own world? And so I'm like, I'm hungry for another like tangible leadership practice, because I think that the playbook that I've been building gradually over the last decade, and certainly has been accelerated through the pandemic and Leadership Reinvented, this work that I'm doing, I'm eager to test it out, because I think I will have the breakthrough that you just described with your board, where you let go. And that's the style of leader that I would like to be, this type of leader I would like to be. I would just like to be part of the beginning of it, be involved very passionately and hands-on with mission, vision, values, principle, purpose, training, culture, and then let go. And I'm excited by that possibility, because I think I don't think I say this out loud. I believe it's going to work, and you see glimpses of this all the time. We saw it most recently with Yvon Chouinard of Patagonia. 100% of his company relinquished to fight climate change. You see this with Mark Benioff standing in front of his peers in 2019 saying, we need to reinvent a system that goes beyond shareholder capitalism. We need stakeholder capitalism, focus on employees, customers, communities, and the planet. Anytime a leader is now heralded for doing exceptional work, it usually has to do not with their accumulation of wealth, but it has to do with the welfare of their employees, again, customers, communities, and the planet. So I think there's a paradigm shift happening over here. And I'm really excited by this possibility because when I started writing Leadership Reinvented, it didn't initially start as a playbook for human-centric leader. It started as an inquiry into leadership failure. I'm obsessed with this question of like, why do leaders fail? Like, who are the bad guys? I really want to understand like who are
learn from our mistakes, right? Learn from others' mistakes, right?
Yeah, like let's find the equivalent of the fictional leaders that we are fascinated by in the world of cinema, for instance. Like, let's find the equivalent of Miranda from The Devil Wears Prada. Let's find the equivalent of Gordon Gekko. And they exist out there. And their reckoning has come. We saw this most recently with Sam Bankman-Fried of FTX, that whole collapse.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Elizabeth Holmes went to jail 13 years. She's gone, right? Like,
did they sentence her? I didn't read that. Did they?
Sentence, she's gone. She's gone.
Is that right?
Yeah,
wow,
man.
I did not read that. I knew that she was convicted. I just didn't hear the sentencing. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's wild. I think it's 11 or 13 years, like unprecedented stuff that's happening now. So we're seeing the pendulum swing back because there was this fervor in the early 2010s, at least, of these like move fast, break things, fail fast, fail early, sort of like a reckless behavior in the innovation or exploitation stage of that the new economy that we're in. All of this is to say, I try very hard to look for these things, but then also try to break them at the same time. I'm obsessed with like finding a theory of everything. Like, what is the closest thing to a theory of everything when it comes to leadership, when it comes to burnout? And there is one, lo and behold, when it comes to leadership, and it's called the D factor of personality traits. All of the worst manifestations of leaders, like the narcissists, the Machiavellians, the psychopaths, the sadists, they're all bound together by the same dynamic, which is the D factor of personality, which is maximizing individual utility while accepting, neglecting, or malevolently provoking disutility for others. Boom. Okay, so check this out. Just in the last 3 days, I watched 3 different movies. I watched Disenchanted, I watched Tar, and I watched Too Big to Fail.
Oh, yeah.
I swear to God, all 3 of those movies had the exact same plot. First of all, there's the hero's journey. But when you look at the old way of being and the new way of being and the lesson that has to be learned with every protagonist, harmony is restored when the protagonist accepts that their purpose has to do with other people. It has to do with improving the lives of people around them. That is the spoiler alert for literally everything. It's a spoiler alert for every game you're going to play, every book you're going to read. Anytime there's chaos being fostered, it has to do with the villain, the nemesis, the antagonist, whatever the case may be, prioritizing their utility and then again accepting, neglecting, or actively malevolently provoking disutility for others. So what is the action to take from this? As a leader, we can call it different things. We can call it human-centric leadership, compassionate leadership, empathetic leadership, but I truly believe it's just leading with love and extending the same unconditional positive regard that we know we're capable of delivering to friends, to family members, to ourselves. How do we extend that in the workplace? And I think that if we do that at scale, we have a real shot at utopia.
I love it. I love it. You're an idealistic. I love it. You. I got the dream out of you. I got it.
There we go, man.
But
as a researcher, I'm always like checking it. I'm like, I don't know. I want to read a little bit more about this. Let's stress test this. Are these theories valid? But here's the thing, man. The ethos, the philosophies, the path that we've been on, at least in recent human history, has been one that's been driven by the opposite of love. It's been driven by fear. It's been driven by scarcity. It's been driven by the immortality projects of people who are beholden to the D factor. So I think the time is coming. I believe that by no later than the end of 2023 will we see the beginnings, at least, hopefully, of a full court press in the opposite direction. And that's going to be a rethinking of the future of work and an acceptance that the future of work, hopefully, maybe full circle where we started this conversation, has nothing to do with work and has everything to do with life itself.
Oh, I love it. Love it. Love it. Well, that was very eloquent. You were very eloquent there at the end. You were like, I mean, it was not that you weren't eloquent the rest of the time. It was just like a nice way of just wrapping it all up that, we need to love others, and let's create a better world, right? I mean, when we boil it all down,
I hope so, man.
let's love ourselves, let's love others, let's make a better world, because we all want, I shouldn't say we all, but the majority want to find peace, love, and joy, right? That's kind of, I mean, when we're in peace, love, and joy, that's when we feel the most human. That's also when we feel the most divine. That's when we feel the most loving, caring. I mean,
Amen.
All the good stuff. We just got to break our addiction to all the bad stuff, right?
I love
all the feelings of bad that we sometimes default to, right?
Yeah, and you use the term idealist, right? And like, there's a part of me that loves that. I accept that. I'm like, yes, so, we need some vision, we need some creativity, we need some idealism over here. But there's also part of me, again, the lizard brain, that's like, man, idealism. How are you going to translate that into action? And in one of the episodes that I listened to, again, the one that I love that you did recently with Halakuri,
yeah.
She gave an example of humanizing people that she fell out with during the pandemic, the anti-vaxxers.
Oh, right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And I thought that was so cool. I was like, wow, okay. Like, there was a very logical progression that led her to that action. It was these people that were important in her life pre-pandemic, friends, family members, colleagues, but because of ideological differences and schisms, they drifted apart. But she wants to reconnect with them. She wants to come closer. Totally. And again, this is one of the other dynamics that you'll see now that you have the spoiler alert, that harmony happens when people come together, when the protagonist and the antagonist actually meet and they talk to each other and they develop the alignment that you had at that conference with the person on the opposite end of the political spectrum.
The guy from Iran. Yeah.
There you go. So again, the action to take over here is, it doesn't have to be sweeping legislature. It doesn't have to be a complete rewriting of the organizational playbook. It's as simple as moving out of patterns of exploitation, moving out of cycles of fear into cycles of togetherness, interbeing, love, and connection, and just rehumanize. Constantly rehumanize.
I love it. Hamza Khan, it was a wonderful conversation. I am so glad I needed it. Thank you. I needed it this morning.
I needed it too, man.
Just to start the day. People find you on your website, hamzakhan.com, which is HAMZAKHAN, like the great Genghis Khan. I actually had another gentleman on the podcast that was a relative of Genghis Khan. And I was like, oh, he said, well, a lot of people last name Khan. He was very prolific dad.
Same here, man.
He had a lot of kids.
Somewhere in my family tree is somebody who experienced quite a bit of distress, man.
Yeah, that's right. So I really appreciate our conversation. Certainly as you work on your next stuff, we'd love to hear more about it. Come on, visit with our community. And if you have 2 minutes, stick around. I'm going to push some buttons. We'll end this podcast, but I so thank you for coming on today.
Matt, thank you. The pleasure was all mine. I know I was an incoherent mess at times, but it was all part of the unraveling. So thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for working with me. And I hope that by the end, the listeners were able to get at least one thing that they can implement into their lives. Thank you. This is a true honor and privilege, sir.
Thank you for being a part of the BriteVibe podcast. For more information, go to britevibe.com. That's BRITE Vibe, VIBE.com. Thank you for listening.